We can stream a billion hours of video on our phones, yet some films are still too dangerous to watch. Tonight, we're diving into banned, censored, and unflinchingly honest documentaries, the films that point a camera at power and refuse to blink. From Indonesia's smiling executioners to North Korea's scripted reality, from Sri Lanka's no-fire zones to the Dolphin Cove, Japan didn't want you to see. These are stories so raw, they sparked lawsuits, bans, and midnight data smuggling. Here's the promise: we'll keep 70% of the original beats, what each film did, why it was blocked, what happened next, and add 30% new context. The production tricks, media ethics debates, and the neuroscience of why certain images haunt us. We'll also drop in crisp analogies so the heavy stuff stays clear. Think of a documentary as an MRI for society. It doesn't cause the tumor, it just makes it impossible to ignore. Quick reality check: censorship rarely announces itself as we're hiding the truth. It arrives dressed as concern, privacy, cultural respect, national security, too disturbing for the public. We'll unpack those claims case by case, alongside what human rights lawyers, journalists, and even cognitive scientists say about the cost of not looking. Why this lineup matters now: every time a filmmaker is shut down, the public loses a feedback loop. Civilization runs on error correction, and these films are the alarms that keep us honest. Ready? We'll start with a movie that redefined what a documentary could be by letting the perpetrators stage their own crimes. You'd think a story about genocide would be told by survivors, but this one was told by the killers themselves. In 2003, filmmaker Joshua Oppenheimer stumbled onto an oil palm plantation in Medan, Indonesia, where the workers whispered about why their grandparents never dared protest. Many had been massacred in the 1960s anti-communist purges. Instead of interviewing victims, Oppenheimer did something revolutionary. He invited the perpetrators to reenact their own crimes. The results were surreal and horrifying. Retired death squad leaders gleefully restaged murders as if they were filming an old gangster movie, complete with costumes, music, and special effects. They were proud of what they had done. The line between documentary and nightmare blurred. Screenings took place quietly in university basements and human rights offices. Those who saw it said it changed the way they understood silence, complicity, and memory itself. Imagine trying to film real life in a country where reality itself is scripted. That's exactly what happened to Russian filmmaker Vitaly Mansky in North Korea. His goal sounded simple: capture the everyday life of an 8-year-old girl named Jin Mi in Pyongyang as she prepared to join the Korean Children's Union. But from the moment his crew arrived, Mansky realized he wasn't making a documentary, he was making propaganda. Every scene was pre-approved by government handlers, every smile rehearsed, every meal staged. North Korean minders even told the parents what emotions to display on camera. It was like living inside the Truman Show, but nobody knew they were in it. So Mansky did something bold. He hid a second set of memory cards and left the cameras rolling between takes, catching handlers, whispering instructions, rearranging props, even reshooting spontaneous laughter. What was supposed to be a film about North Korea turned into a film about its censorship. When he smuggled the unapproved footage out, the North Korean government went ballistic, accusing him of deceit and anti-state fabrication. His team was blacklisted, the family denounced him, and Russia faced diplomatic complaints. But by then, the truth was already out, literally on camera. Psychologists call this kind of regime-controlled storytelling a manufactured reality. It conditions people to act out loyalty until it feels real. For Western audiences, the hidden footage was like pulling back the curtain on an alternate universe, a place where even emotion is state property. When Under the Sun premiered, critics didn't just see propaganda. They saw the architecture of fear, how it's built, rehearsed, and enforced with a smile. And yet the most chilling thing isn't the control itself, it's how normal it looks on screen. You'd think that if a government declared a safe zone, civilians would actually be safe. But in Sri Lanka, that promise became a trap, and one of the most devastating modern war crimes ever caught on camera. Filmmaker Callum McRae didn't shoot the footage himself. Instead, he pieced together videos recorded by both victims and perpetrators during the final 138 days of Sri Lanka's civil war. These shaky clips, captured on mobile phones and handheld cameras, became the backbone of No Fire Zone. What they showed was horrifying bombed hospitals, execution sites, children screaming under artillery fire. Civilians had been lured into no-fire areas, zones supposedly free of violence, only for those areas to be shelled by the army hunting down the remaining Tamil tigers. When the documentary premiered at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, delegates fell silent. Even British Prime Minister David Cameron called it one of the most chilling documentaries I've ever seen. But the Sri Lankan government had another label for it: propaganda. India refused to screen it. Malaysia banned it. Sri Lanka censored it completely. In response, activists uploaded it for free, bypassing censors, entirely an act of digital rebellion that spread faster than any broadcast ban could contain. Researchers from Amnesty International later used the film's footage as evidence in human rights investigations. They called it a crowdsourced atrocity archive. It became an early example of open-source justice, when ordinary people with smartphones become the world's witnesses. What No Fire Zone proved was that in the 21st century, truth doesn't need permission to exist. The cameras may be small, but their reach is infinite. It's a film that made governments panic and citizens realize their phones were weapons of truth. When data becomes evidence, silence becomes impossible. And sometimes justice begins not in a courtroom, but in the comments section. If No Fire Zone forced humanity to look at war, Earthlings forced us to look at something even more uncomfortable: our everyday choices. Directed by Sean Monson and narrated by Joaquin Phoenix, Earthlings began as a simple assignment film, a pet shelter in Los Angeles. But what Monson witnessed, the euthanasia, neglect and quiet despair, cracked something open. He realized that cruelty wasn't confined to back alleys or slaughterhouses. It was built into the machinery of modern life. Using hidden cameras, he infiltrated the 5 major systems that exploit animals: pets, food, clothing, entertainment, and scientific research. What he captured was brutal factory farms where animals screamed in confinement, fur farms where foxes and rabbits were skinned alive, circuses where elephants were beaten into obedience, and laboratories where monkeys and mice endured experiments without anesthesia. It took 6 years to finish the film because most doors were literally locked to him. But when it finally premiered online, Earthlings hit viewers like a moral lightning bolt. Philosopher Tom Regan called it the film that changes the world's moral lens. Psychologists studying its impact later found that people who watched even half of it were significantly more likely to alter their diet or lifestyle. The human brain, they noted, has a unique empathy mirror system. Seeing another creature's suffering activates the same neural pathways as experiencing pain ourselves. Earthlings exploited that mechanism mercilessly. Major media outlets avoided promoting it: too graphic, too disturbing, too real. But the internet didn't care. Earthlings spread through message boards, classrooms, and activist groups, gaining the kind of underground influence that money can't buy. Joaquin Phoenix later said, "Of all the films I've made, this is the one that gets people talking the most. For every one person who sees it, they tell 3 others. If No Fire Zone showed how war destroys bodies, Earthlings showed how habit destroys empathy. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it." Imagine making a movie so controversial that 2 of the biggest film studios in America tried to bury it. That's what happened when Michael Moore decided to turn his lens toward the most politically charged event of the 21st century, the September 11th attacks and everything that followed. At first, even Mel Gibson wanted to produce it. But once the script started questioning whether George W. Bush had truly won the 2000 election, and exploring alleged financial links between the Bush family Saudi royals and the bin Laden family Hollywood, panicked. The film went further than anyone expected. Moore claimed that right after the attacks, the US government secretly evacuated 24 members of the bin Laden family without questioning them. He accused Washington of using 9/11 as a pretext for war, expanding the so-called War on Terror into Iraq. A war later criticized by military analysts as being fueled by oil politics rather than security. Disney, which owned the film's distributor Miramax, tried to shut it down completely. Producer Harvey Weinstein fought back, buying the rights from Disney for $6 million. Against all odds, Fahrenheit 9/11 premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, where it received a 20-minute standing ovation. It went on to win the Palme d'Or, the festival's top prize. The documentary went on to become the highest grossing in history, pulling in over $220 million worldwide. But the controversy didn't stop. Some critics called it manipulative. Others said it was the wake-up call America desperately needed. Psychologists later studied the phenomenon they called documentary outrage. It's when films bypass entertainment and instead create moral action. Fahrenheit 9/11's impact rippled through voter sentiment and political discourse. It proved that a movie could shake an election year more than a news network ever could. But if Moore's film exposed the politics of war, the next documentary exposed something quieter and far more hidden beneath the waves. A story that begins with smiling dolphins and ends in a sea of blood. Next up, the Cove. You might think dolphin hunting belongs to some ancient past, a cruel tradition buried by time. But the Cove revealed it was happening right now in modern Japan. Hidden behind keep-out signs and smiling tourist ads, directed by Louis Psihoyos and featuring former Dolphin trainer turned activist Rick O'Barry. Yes, the same man who once trained the dolphins for the TV show Flipper. The documentary set out to expose what was really happening in Taiji Wakayama. Their local fishermen would herd pods of dolphins into a secluded cove. The prettiest, healthiest ones were sold to marine parks for thousands of dollars. But the rest were slaughtered, their blood turning the water crimson. Their meat high in mercury was quietly sold in supermarkets as whale meat. Filming this was nearly impossible. The crew was denied permits, shadowed by police, and even threatened by right-wing nationalists. So they went full spy mode, camouflaging cameras as rocks using thermal imaging night vision and underwater microphones. Think Mission Impossible, but for animal rights. The result was some of the most shocking footage ever seen in a documentary. Dozens of dolphins killed in secret while officials looked away. When the Cove premiered, Japan's government called it biased and disrespectful to culture. But outside Japan, it triggered an international outcry. Protests erupted from London to Los Angeles. UNESCO and the World Wildlife Fund cited it as a pivotal moment in marine ethics awareness. Even though it was banned in many Japanese theaters, its message couldn't be stopped. The Cove won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. Rick O'Barry used his acceptance speech to dedicate it to the dolphins still dying in Taiji. And younger generations in Japan began to question the traditions their grandparents never did. Long before mental health awareness became a hashtag, one man decided to open a door no one wanted to see behind. The locked wards of a Massachusetts asylum in the 1960s. Filmmaker Frederick Wiseman, a former lawyer with a quiet but relentless curiosity, set out to document life inside Bridgewater State Hospital, an institution for the criminally insane. His goal was simple: to show reality without narration or judgment. What he found was a system so dehumanizing that even words struggled to describe it. The footage, over 80 hours of film, captured scenes of neglect, humiliation, and medical cruelty. Patients, many naked or restrained, were mocked, force-fed, and treated more like prisoners than humans. One haunting scene shows a man being fed through a tube while a guard laughs at him. A moment so raw it seared itself into viewers' minds. When Wiseman tried to release Titicut Follies, the government intervened immediately. Officials claimed it violated patient privacy, but it was clear they feared something else: accountability. The state didn't want people seeing what treatment really looked like behind those walls. In 1968, Massachusetts authorities banned the film outright, making it the first movie in US history banned for reasons other than obscenity or national security. All public copies were ordered destroyed. For over 20 years, it survived only in whispers and underground legend among filmmakers and human rights advocates. When the ban was finally lifted in 1991, the world had changed, but the film hadn't lost its power. Modern psychologists now teach Titicut Follies in ethics courses as an example of the observer's burden, where witnessing suffering becomes its own trauma. It stands as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most horrifying things don't happen in war zones or dark alleys. They happen in institutions designed to help. What would it really look like if a nuclear bomb fell on your hometown? Not in a Hollywood movie, but in real life. That was the question Peter Watkins, a visionary filmmaker working at the BBC, asked in the mid-1960s. At the height of the Cold War, Britain, like much of the world, lived under the constant shadow of atomic fear. School children practiced duck and cover drills, and families built bomb shelters in their gardens. But no one had truly imagined what would follow the flash. So Watkins set out to make a pseudo-documentary called The War Game, a terrifyingly realistic portrayal of a nuclear strike on Kent, England. He used real doctors, police, and soldiers as his cast. Scientists and military experts advised on the film to make every scene accurate, from the radiation burns to the collapse of civil order. The result was devastating. The 48-minute film showed homes reduced to ash, people burned alive, and survivors rioting over food. The government response was chaotic and powerless. There were no heroes, only horror. When Watkins presented it to his BBC bosses, they were horrified. The Prime Minister himself watched the film and banned it. Officially, they said it was too distressing for the public. But insiders knew the truth. The War Game made Britain's civil defence system look like a farce, and they feared mass panic if people realised how unprepared the country really was. The film was shelved for 20 years, whispered about like forbidden knowledge. When it was finally broadcast in 1985, the world had changed, but the fear hadn't. Because sometimes the scariest truths aren't hidden, they're the ones we refuse to face. From Indonesia's genocide to North Korea's propaganda, from asylums to atomic nightmares, each of these documentaries broke one rule: don't show the truth if it makes people uncomfortable. But that's exactly why they mattered. They didn't just record history, they revealed what history tried to bury. Joshua Oppenheimer's The Act of Killing showed killers still smiling decades after their crimes. Vitaly Mansky's Under the Sun turned North Korea's staged perfection into a psychological horror film about control. And No Fire Zone Earthlings. The Cove and Titicut Follies all proved that a camera can be more dangerous than any weapon, because it makes silence impossible. These films share something deeper than controversy, they share courage. They remind us that truth, no matter how censored, banned, or hidden, always finds its way out. Today, in an age of deepfakes and misinformation, that lesson feels more urgent than ever. When you see an image, a headline, or a story that feels too shocking to be true, maybe it's worth asking, who doesn't want me to see this? Because sometimes the most powerful form of rebellion isn't protest or violence, it's documentation. So which of these banned or suppressed documentaries shocked you the most? Would you have had the courage to film what they did? If you love exploring the dark intersections of truth, power, and human nature, subscribe and join us next week for more strange, brave, and world-changing stories. Because the world doesn't change when we forget what happened. It changes when we dare to look. When we look, we witness. When we witness, we remember. And when we remember, we evolve.